Baby's Vaccination Day. Comforted by bear hugs, the medicine that really worked. The morning started like any other, except it didn't. Ethan Marshall stood by the kitchen window, watching steam rise from his coffee cup while his wife, Lily Morgan, moved through their small apartment with their 3-month-old son, Leo. But something felt different today. The air seemed heavier somehow, charged with an unspoken tension that made even the simplest movements feel deliberate. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she packed the diaper bag for what must have been the 3rd time, checking and rechecking that everything was there. The formula bottles, the extra diapers, the favorite blanket with the little elephants on it that Leo couldn't sleep without. She knew she was overthinking it, but she couldn't help herself. Today was Leo's first vaccination appointment, and though she knew it was necessary, the thought of watching her baby in pain made her stomach twist into knots. Ethan watched his wife from across the room, recognizing the signs of her anxiety in the way she kept tucking the same strand of hair behind her ear, the way her movements had become quick and sharp rather than her usual graceful flow. He set down his coffee and walked over to her, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. "Hey," he said softly, feeling the tension in her muscles. "It's going to be okay. Millions of babies get vaccinated every day. Leo's going to be fine." Lily turned to look at him, and he saw the worry swimming in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's important. I know it's to keep him healthy. But knowing something and feeling it are 2 different things, aren't they?" She picked up Leo from his bouncer, holding him close against her chest, breathing in that sweet baby smell that still made her heart skip even after 3 months. The baby gurgled happily, completely unaware of his parents' concerns, his tiny fingers wrapping around a strand of his mother's hair. The drive to the clinic felt longer than usual, though it was the same 15-minute route they'd taken for Leo's previous checkups. The radio played softly in the background, some morning talk show discussing the weather forecast, but neither Ethan nor Lily was really listening. Leo sat contentedly in his car seat, occasionally making soft cooing sounds as he watched the world pass by through the window. The trees were just beginning to show hints of autumn color, golden edges creeping into the green leaves, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the road. Lily kept turning around to check on Leo, adjusting his blanket, making sure his pacifier was within reach, though he seemed perfectly content without it. "Remember when we first brought him home from the hospital?" Ethan said suddenly, trying to lighten the mood. "You were so worried about the car seat being installed correctly that you made me reinstall it 3 times. A small smile tugged at Lily's lips. "Well, it needed to be perfect. Still does." The pediatric clinic was a cheerful place, or at least it tried to be. The walls were painted in soft pastels with murals of cartoon animals playing in meadows, and there was a fish tank in the waiting room that usually captivated Leo's attention. But today, even the normally soothing environment couldn't quite dispel the underlying tension. Other parents sat with their children, some reading books, others trying to distract fussy toddlers with toys from the communal toy box. One mother was bouncing a crying infant on her knee, and the sound made Lily hold Leo a little tighter. The waiting seemed to stretch on forever, though the clock on the wall insisted it had only been 10 minutes since they'd checked in. Ethan filled out the necessary paperwork while Lily walked Leo around the waiting room, pointing out the fish, the pictures on the walls, anything to keep herself occupied and to keep the worry from building up too much. When the nurse finally called Leo's name, Lily felt her heart rate spike. The examination room was small but bright, with more cheerful decorations and a padded table covered in crinkly paper. The nurse was kind, an older woman with gentle hands and a warm smile, who cooed at Leo and commented on his beautiful eyes. She took his measurements first, weight, and length, all the while chatting pleasantly about how well he was growing, how healthy he looked. But Lily barely heard any of it. Her focus was entirely on what was coming next. The nurse prepared the vaccines, explaining what each one was for, the diseases they would protect against, the possible side effects to watch for. Ethan asked questions, practical ones about fever reducers and when to call if they had concerns, while Lily just held Leo, feeling his warm weight against her, trying to memorize this moment before everything changed. The first injection happened so quickly that for a moment, Leo didn't react at all. There was a brief second of silence, a pause where time seemed to stop, and then his face crumpled. The cry that followed was unlike any sound he'd made before, high and sharp and full of betrayal. Lily felt tears spring to her own eyes as she immediately pulled him close, whispering soothing words that seemed inadequate against his distress. "I know, baby, I know. Mommy's so sorry. It's almost over, I promise." The nurse worked quickly, administering the remaining vaccines with practiced efficiency, but each injection brought fresh waves of crying. Ethan stood close, his hand on Lily's back, feeling helpless in the face of his son's pain. The nurse placed small bandages over the injection sites, little ones with smiling faces on them that seemed almost mocking given the circumstances. That's when it happened. Through the window of the examination room, something moved in the hallway. At first, Ethan thought it was just another patient, maybe someone with a service animal, but then he looked closer. It was a dog, but unlike any dog he'd ever seen before. It was enormous, with thick, dark fur that made it look almost bear-like, and it was standing perfectly still just outside their door. The strangest thing was that no one else in the hallway seemed to notice it. People walked past without even glancing at the massive animal. "Lily," Ethan whispered, but before he could say more, the door to their examination room slowly pushed open. The nurse had stepped out to get something, leaving it slightly ajar, and through that gap, the enormous dog entered. Lily's first instinct was to protect Leo, to pull him away from this unknown animal, but something in the dog's eyes stopped her. They were deep brown, almost golden in the fluorescent light, and they held an intelligence, a gentleness that was almost human. The dog moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured and careful. It approached them with its head slightly lowered, not in submission but in what seemed like respect. Leo was still crying, his little face red and scrunched up, tears streaming down his cheeks. The dog stopped just beside them and then did something extraordinary. It began to hum, not a growl, not a whine, but an actual hum, low and melodic, almost like a lullaby. The sound seemed to vibrate through the air, through the floor, through their bodies. Leo's crying began to quiet almost immediately. His little body, which had been rigid with distress, began to relax. His eyes, still wet with tears, focused on the large dog with sudden interest. The dog moved closer, so close that its massive head was level with Leo in Lily's arms. Very gently, so gently that it was almost imperceptible, the dog pressed its nose against Leo's tiny hand. The baby's fingers, which had been clenched into tiny fists, opened and grabbed onto the dog's fur. The humming continued, that strange, beautiful sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the animal's chest. Lily found herself swaying slightly to the rhythm of it, as if her body recognized something in the melody that her mind couldn't quite grasp. "What's happening?" Lily whispered, but Ethan could only shake his head, as mesmerized as she was. The dog's presence filled the small room, not in a threatening way, but in a manner that made everything else seem less important. The fluorescent light seemed softer, the clinical smell of the room faded, and for a moment, it felt like they were somewhere else entirely, somewhere safe and warm and timeless. Leo had completely stopped crying now. He was actually smiling, his tiny fingers still tangled in the dog's fur, making soft, happy sounds that echoed the dog's humming. The dog's eyes never left the baby's face, watching him with an expression that could only be described as tender. The nurse returned then, stopping in the doorway with a gasp. "Oh my goodness! Whose dog is this?" But even as she spoke, the dog was already moving away. It backed up slowly, carefully extracting itself from Leo's grip. The baby made a small sound of protest, but didn't cry. The dog looked at each of them in turn, Lily, Ethan, even the nurse, and then it simply walked out of the room. By the time Ethan reached the doorway to look into the hallway, the dog was gone. Not walking away, not turning a corner, just gone. "Did you see where it went?" he asked the nurse, who was still standing there looking stunned. She shook her head slowly. "I've never seen that dog before. We don't allow animals in this part of the clinic except for service animals, and they have to be registered. I don't know what that was." Leo remained calm for the rest of the appointment, even cheerful. The nurse kept commenting on it, how unusual it was for a baby to recover so quickly from vaccinations. Usually, they remained fussy for quite a while, but Leo was cooing and smiling as if nothing had happened. The injection sites didn't even seem to bother him. Lily and Ethan exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing but neither quite ready to voice it out loud. What had just happened? Where had that dog come from? And more importantly, how had it known exactly what Leo needed? As they prepared to leave, the nurse gave them the usual aftercare instructions, but her eyes kept drifting to the spot where the dog had stood, as if she too was trying to make sense of what she'd witnessed. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning's journey. This silence was filled with wonder rather than worry. Leo slept peacefully in his car seat, his little chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Every now and then, Lily would turn to look at him, half expecting to see the mysterious dog somehow there with them. "Ethan," she finally said, "that really happened, right? I didn't imagine it." Ethan reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It happened. I saw it too. That dog, the humming, the way Leo just calmed down. It all happened." They drove past a park where people were walking their dogs, normal-sized dogs doing normal dog things like chasing balls and sniffing trees. None of them looked anything like the creature they'd encountered at the clinic. When they got home, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they needed to understand what had happened. She settled Leo in his crib for his nap, amazed that he went down without any fuss despite the morning's trauma. Then she sat down at the computer and began searching. Giant dogs, bear dogs, therapy dogs, emotional support animals. She found plenty of information about various breeds and their roles in healthcare settings, but nothing that quite matched what they'd experienced. The humming especially seemed to have no explanation. Dogs might whine or howl, but humming, that strange, melodic humming that had seemed to reach right into Leo's distress and soothe it away. There was nothing about that anywhere. Ethan, meanwhile, had taken a different approach. He'd gone back outside and was walking around their neighborhood, looking for any sign of the dog. He asked neighbors if they'd seen it, described it to people at the corner store, even stopped by the local veterinary clinic to ask if they knew of any dogs matching that description. Everyone shook their heads. A dog that size, that distinctive, would surely be known in the community, but no one had seen it. It was as if the animal had materialized just for them, just for that moment when Leo needed comfort, and then vanished back into whatever realm it had come from. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead, Ethan found it oddly comforting. Something or someone had been watching over his son, had known exactly when to appear and what to do. That evening, as they sat together on the couch with Leo playing happily on his activity mat, Lily suddenly remembered something. "Your grandfather," she said to Ethan. "Didn't he used to talk about a dog when you were little? Something about his childhood?" Ethan frowned, trying to recall. His grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, before he and Lily had even met, but he had been a storyteller, always sharing tales from his youth. "He did mention a dog," Ethan said slowly. "But I always thought it was just one of his stories. He said when he was very young, maybe 4 or 5, he was terribly sick with scarlet fever. This was back in the 1940s when that could be fatal for children. He said a large dog, almost like a bear, would come and lie with him when the fever was at its worst. It would make this sound not quite a bark, not quite a howl, but something musical. He said that dog saved his life, that its presence was better than any medicine." Lily felt goosebumps rise on her arms. "Ethan, what if it was the same dog?" Ethan shook his head, but his expression was uncertain. "That's impossible. That would have been over 80 years ago. Dogs don't live that long." But even as he said it, he was thinking about how the dog had appeared and disappeared, how no one else had seemed to notice it in the hallway, how it had known exactly what Leo needed. Nothing about the encounter had been normal or explainable by conventional logic. "Maybe," Lily said softly, "maybe some things don't need to follow the rules we think we know. Maybe some connections, some protections, they transcend time." The idea should have seemed crazy, but the more they thought about it, the more sense it made in its own strange way. Ethan remembered more details from his grandfather's stories now. How the old man had said the dog appeared during his illness and stayed until he was well, then disappeared. How his own parents had never seen it, though they'd sat by his bedside for days. How he'd looked for that dog for years afterward but never found it, and how he'd always said he knew it would come back someday, not for him, but for someone in his family who needed it. "He used to hum," Ethan said suddenly. "My grandfather. When I was upset as a kid, he would hum this tune. I never knew where it came from, but it always made me feel better." He tried to recall the melody, humming a few notes, and Lily gasped. It was similar, not exactly the same, but close enough to the sound the dog had made that morning. They decided to go through some of Ethan's grandfather's things, boxes that had been stored in their closet since Ethan had cleaned out the old man's apartment. There were photographs, letters, various mementos from a long life well lived. And then, at the bottom of one box, wrapped in tissue paper, they found it. A small, carved wooden dog, worn smooth by decades of handling. It was beautifully detailed despite its age, and it looked exactly like the dog they'd seen that morning. Every detail was perfect, from the bear-like build to the gentle expression in the carved eyes. There was a note with it, written in his grandfather's shaky handwriting. "For my great-grandchild when the time comes. He will know what to do." Ethan's hands trembled as he held the carving. His grandfather had died before Ethan had even met Lily, long before Leo was conceived. How could he have known? How could any of this be possible? But the evidence was there in his hands, solid and real. The carving was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been after sitting in a box in a closet. When Ethan brought it close to Leo, the baby reached for it immediately, his little fingers wrapping around it with surprising strength. And then Leo did something he'd never done before. He hummed, Just a few notes, barely audible, but unmistakably the same melody they'd heard that morning. The room seemed to shift around them, the evening light through the windows taking on a golden quality that had nothing to do with the sunset. For a moment, just a moment, Ethan could have sworn he saw a shadow in the corner of the room, large and patient and protective. But when he blinked, it was gone. Leo continued to hold the wooden dog, content and peaceful, occasionally making those soft humming sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his 3-month-old vocal cords should have been able to produce. "It's watching over him," Lily whispered. "Whatever it is, wherever it comes from, it's protecting our son." They did more research over the following days, diving deep into family history, local legends, anything that might explain what they'd experienced. Ethan called distant relatives, asking about family stories, about his grandfather's childhood. An elderly great-aunt remembered something, a story her mother had told about a guardian that watched over the family's children, appearing in times of great need. She said it had been happening for generations, as far back as anyone could remember. Always the same description. A large, bear-like dog that could soothe any distress with its presence. Always appearing when a child was in pain or danger, always disappearing once the crisis passed. The rational part of their minds wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, as shared delusion, as anything but what it seemed to be. But the evidence was mounting. Lily found an old photograph in one of the boxes, a faded image from what must have been the 1920s. It showed a young boy, probably Ethan's great-great-grandfather, standing next to a large, dark shape. The photograph was too old and damaged to make out details, but the size and form were unmistakable. On the back, in fountain pen ink that had faded to brown, someone had written, "Timothy and his guardian, 1923. The same dog, or something that looked exactly like it. Over 100 years ago, they started talking to other parents at Leo's playgroup, carefully, indirectly, asking if anyone had ever experienced anything unusual at the pediatric clinic. Most hadn't, but one mother, Jessica Brooks, pulled Lily aside one day. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "The dog?" Lily's heart raced. "You've seen it?" Jessica nodded, her eyes distant with memory. "When my daughter Savannah was about Leo's age, she had a terrible reaction to something, we never found out what. She was screaming in the emergency room, nothing would calm her. And then this dog appeared, massive thing, looked like a bear. It just stood there next to her bed and hummed. Can you believe it?" Savannah stopped crying immediately. The doctors couldn't explain it. They said we must have imagined it, but I know what I saw. Jessica went on to explain that she'd tried to find the dog afterward, had even gone back to the hospital several times hoping to see it again, but it never reappeared. Savannah was 5 now, healthy and happy, but Jessica had never forgotten that night. "I think," she said slowly, "I think there are things in this world that exist just to help, just to heal. Things that don't fit into our understanding of reality, but are real nonetheless. That dog, whatever it was, it saved my daughter that night. Not from dying maybe, but from suffering. And sometimes that's the most important kind of saving." As the days passed, Leo continued to thrive. His injection sites healed without any complications, and he showed no signs of the fever or fussiness that often followed vaccinations. He kept the wooden dog with him constantly, and Ethan and Lily didn't have the heart to take it away. There was something about the way he held it, the way his little fingers traced its carved features, that suggested it meant more to him than just a toy. Sometimes, late at night when they checked on him, They would find him sleeping peacefully with the carving clutched to his chest, and they could swear they heard that humming again, soft and low, coming from somewhere in the room. Ethan started having dreams about his grandfather, vivid dreams where the old man was young again, playing with a large, dark dog in a field of golden wheat. In the dreams, his grandfather would look directly at him and smile. "Taking care of each other," he would say. "That's what family does, even across time, even across the veil." Ethan would wake from these dreams feeling peaceful rather than sad, feeling connected to something larger than himself. He shared the dreams with Lily, and she admitted she'd been having similar experiences. Dreams where she saw the dog watching over Leo, always present even when invisible. One evening, about a week after the vaccination appointment, they were giving Leo his bath when Lily noticed something on his shoulder, right where one of the injections had been. It wasn't a mark from the needle, but rather what looked like a very faint pattern in his skin, almost like a birthmark, but one she was certain hadn't been there before. When she looked closer, she gasped. It was shaped like a paw print, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. "Ethan, look at this," she called, and together they examined the mark. It was perfect, delicate, and somehow beautiful. A sign, perhaps, of protection given and received. They decided not to tell anyone else about the mark. It felt too personal, too sacred somehow. But they took photographs, carefully documenting it from every angle. They wanted Leo to know when he was older that something extraordinary had happened to him, that he had been touched by something beyond ordinary understanding. They created a special box where they kept the photographs, the wooden dog when Leo wasn't holding it, and a journal where they wrote down everything they remembered about that day, and the days that followed. It would be Leo's someday when he was old enough to understand, or perhaps when he had children of his own who might need protection. The pediatrician called a few days later to check on Leo, standard procedure after vaccinations. When Lily told her that Leo had done remarkably well, no fever, no excessive crying, the doctor sounded surprised but pleased. "That's wonderful," she said. "Some babies are just more resilient than others." Lily didn't mention the dog, or the humming, or the way Leo had been transformed from distressed to peaceful in a matter of moments. Some things, she was learning, were better kept as family secrets, family miracles that didn't need medical validation to be real and true. As the weeks turned into months, life settled back into its normal rhythm. Leo grew and developed, meeting all his milestones with ease. He was a remarkably happy baby, content and easy to soothe when he did get upset. The wooden dog remained his favorite possession, and he would reach for it whenever he was tired or uncomfortable. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the house was very quiet and the light was just right, Ethan and Lily would see something out of the corner of their eyes. A shadow that was too large to be cast by anything in the room, a movement that had no source, a presence that felt protective and familiar. They stopped questioning it after a while. Some mysteries, they realized, weren't meant to be solved, but simply accepted with gratitude. The dog, whether it was a spirit, a guardian angel in animal form, or something else entirely, had come when their son needed comfort. It had provided exactly what no medicine could, the assurance that he was loved and protected by forces beyond his parents' ability to provide. And that, they decided, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Ethan found himself thinking about legacy differently after that experience, not just in terms of material things passed down or genetic traits inherited, but in terms of love that transcends time and death. His grandfather's love for him, expressed through stories and humming lullabies, had somehow manifested in this protective presence for Leo. It made him wonder about all the ways love continues after we're gone, all the forms it might take to reach those who need it. He started telling Leo stories, even though the baby was too young to understand. Stories about his great-grandfather and the dog, about family and protection and love that never really dies. Lily, for her part, found her anxiety about Leo's well-being gradually easing, not because she became careless or less attentive, but because she truly believed now that they weren't alone in protecting their son. There were forces at work, benevolent and mysterious, that would appear when truly needed. It didn't mean she wouldn't worry, all mothers worry, but it meant she could trust that in moments of real crisis, help would come, even if from the most unexpected sources. She started a tradition of saying a quiet thank you each night, not to anyone or anything specific, just a general gratitude sent out into the universe for the protection they'd received. The wooden dog began to show signs of wear from Leo's constant handling, but instead of deteriorating, it seemed to become more beautiful. The wood developed a deeper patina, and the carved features seemed to become more defined rather than less. It was as if Leo's touch was somehow enhancing it, bringing it more fully to life. They had it examined once by an antique dealer, curious about its age and origin. The man had been puzzled, saying the carving technique suggested it was very old, possibly several hundred years, but the wood itself seemed to have properties he couldn't identify. He offered them a substantial sum for it, but they declined without hesitation. Some things were beyond price. As Leo's first birthday approached, they decided to return to the pediatric clinic for his 12-month checkup. It would include more vaccinations, and while they felt more confident this time, there was still a flutter of nervousness. They brought the wooden dog with them, tucked into the diaper bag just in case. The same nurse was there, and she recognized them immediately. "How's our little miracle baby?" she asked with a warm smile. She didn't mention the dog incident directly, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she hadn't forgotten. The appointment went smoothly. Leo cried when he received his shots, as was expected, but he calmed quickly when Lily held him, and Ethan produced the wooden dog from the bag. This time, the large dog didn't appear. They found themselves almost disappointed, having half hoped to see their mysterious protector again. But as they were leaving, the nurse stopped them. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been working here for 30 years. I've seen a lot of things I can't explain. But that day with your son, that was something special. I think about it sometimes, that dog, the way it just knew what to do. Makes me think there's more to this world than what we can see and measure." She smiled and patted Leo's head gently. "This one's got a guardian angel, I think. Or maybe a guardian dog is more accurate." They thanked her and left, feeling validated in their experience. That night, as they were putting Leo to bed, he did something new. He held up the wooden dog and said his first clear word, "Dog." Not mama or dada, which they'd been trying to coach him to say for weeks, but dog. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he hummed. The same melody they'd heard that day at the clinic, note for note, perfect despite his age. Ethan and Lily stood frozen, watching their son commune with his wooden toy in a way that seemed to transcend the normal relationship between child and object. The room filled with that familiar warmth, that sense of presence and protection. Later, after Leo was asleep, they sat together in their living room, processing what had happened. "Do you think he'll see it again?" Lily asked. "The real dog?" Ethan considered this. Maybe, when he needs it. Or maybe when his children need it. The thought of Leo growing up, having children of his own, seemed impossibly far away, but the idea that this protection might continue through generations was comforting. they'd become part of something larger, a chain of love and guardianship that stretched back through time and would continue forward long after they were gone. They started researching their family histories more thoroughly, both Ethan's and Lily's. They found other stories, hints, and suggestions of similar experiences. A great-grandmother who spoke of a protective presence during a difficult childbirth. A cousin, several times removed, who credited his survival from a childhood illness to a mysterious animal visitor. The stories were never exactly the same, but there were common threads. Appearance in times of need, comfort beyond what medicine could provide, and always the element of mystery and disappearance. One day, while organizing photos on her computer, Lily discovered something odd. In a picture she'd taken of Leo in his crib the night after the vaccination, there was a shadow in the background that shouldn't have been there. When she enlarged it, enhanced it, the outline was unmistakable. The dog, or at least the suggestion of it, watching over their sleeping baby. She showed it to Ethan, and they stared at it together, this photographic evidence of something that shouldn't exist. They saved it in multiple places, added it to Leo's special box. Proof, if he ever needed it, that magic or miracles or whatever you wanted to call it was real. As time passed, they noticed other families at the playgroup and in their neighborhood seemed drawn to them, especially those with young children who were struggling with illness or injury. Without ever explicitly talking about the dog, Ethan and Lily found themselves offering comfort, sharing stories of unexpected help arriving when most needed. They became known as the couple you could talk to when things seemed impossible, when conventional medicine and conventional comfort weren't enough. They never promised miracles, but they offered hope, and sometimes that was enough to help people through difficult times. The wooden dog became something of a family talisman. When Leo was sick, he would clutch it tightly. When he had nightmares, it would be under his pillow. And always there was that sense of being watched over, protected. Friends who visited often commented on the peaceful atmosphere in their home, the sense of safety and warmth that seemed to permeate every room. Ethan and Lily knew it wasn't just their imagination. The protection that had manifested so dramatically that day at the clinic had settled into something quieter, but no less real. A constant presence that made their house a home in the deepest sense. They had more children over the years, a daughter and then another son. Each child, at some point in their early years, had an encounter with unusual comfort during a moment of distress. Not always the dog, sometimes just a feeling, a warmth, a sudden cessation of pain that couldn't be medically explained. The wooden dog was passed between them as needed, and each child seemed to understand instinctively that it was special, more than just a toy. They would find the children sometimes sitting together, the wooden dog in the middle of their circle, humming that familiar melody in perfect harmony despite never having been taught it. Ethan's great-aunt passed away when Leo was 3, but before she died she sent them a package. Inside was another carved figure, this one of a child with a dog. The note simply said, "From the beginning." The carving was even older than the dog they had, the wood so aged it was almost black. But the detail was still visible, and the child's face bore an uncanny resemblance to Leo. They added it to their collection, these tangible links to a mystery that spanned generations. They wondered who had carved them when the first protection had been given, what ancestor had first been visited by the guardian. The story spread quietly through their community, not as gossip or sensation, but as something softer, a whisper of hope for parents facing their children's pain. Sometimes, very rarely, others would report similar experiences. A dog that appeared and disappeared. A humming that soothed what medicine couldn't touch. Always with young children, always in moments of genuine need. Ethan and Lily became unofficial keepers of these stories, collecting them not for proof or publication, but simply to honor them, to acknowledge that something beautiful and mysterious was happening. When Leo was 5, old enough to understand at least part of the story, they told him about his vaccination day. They showed him the photos, the wooden dog he still carried everywhere, explained about his great-great-grandfather and the guardian that had watched over their family for generations. Leo listened with the serious attention only a 5-year-old could muster, then asked, "Will the dog come back?" Lily and Ethan exchanged glances. "If you ever really need it," Ethan said carefully, "I think it will." Leo nodded, satisfied, and went back to playing, the wooden dog tucked under his arm as always. That night, Leo asked to hear the story again at bedtime. As Ethan told it, embellishing here and there to make it more exciting for a 5-year-old's imagination, he noticed Leo's eyes growing heavy. Just before the boy fell asleep, he mumbled something that made Ethan's breath catch. "I saw him yesterday," Leo said drowsily. "The big dog, he was in the garden. He said, 'I'm doing good.'" Before Ethan could ask more, Leo was asleep, breathing peacefully, the wooden dog held close. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching his son sleep, wondering what other meetings might have occurred that he and Lily didn't know about. He found Lily in the kitchen and told her what Leo had said. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking, maybe we're not supposed to understand it all. Maybe the mystery is part of the gift. If we could explain it, categorize it, prove it scientifically, would it still hold the same power? Would it still be able to do what it does?" Ethan considered this. She was right, of course. The not knowing, the wonder of it, that was part of what made it so special. It required faith, not in any religious sense, but faith in love itself, in the bonds that connect families across time and space. They continued to document everything, though. Photos, stories, dates, and times. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to preserve the legacy for their children and their children's children. They created a beautiful leather-bound book, handwritten, with pressed flowers from their garden, and small drawings Lily made of the dog as she remembered it. It became a family treasure, something to be added to by each generation, a record of love manifesting in impossible ways. They imagined future grandchildren and great-grandchildren reading it, adding their own experiences, continuing the chain of wonder. The pediatric clinic eventually moved to a new, modern building across town. The old building was renovated into offices. But sometimes, people reported seeing a large dog in the parking lot of the old location, always at dawn or dusk, always watching as if waiting for something. Ethan and Lily drove by once, curious, and while they didn't see the dog, they felt it, that familiar presence, that sense of being watched over. They sat in their car for a few minutes, just feeling grateful, before driving home to their children, their life, their continued unfolding of ordinary days punctuated by extraordinary grace. As Leo grew older, he showed an unusual affinity for animals, especially dogs. Not in the typical way children love pets, but something deeper. Dogs that were normally skittish would approach him. Aggressive dogs would calm in his presence. At the animal shelter where they volunteered as a family, the staff started calling Leo the dog whisperer. He would sit with the most traumatized animals, humming softly, and they would gradually relax, trust, begin to heal. Watching him, Ethan and Lily could see the echo of that first encounter, the gift that had been given being passed forward in a different form. The wooden dog remained Leo's most treasured possession, even as he outgrew other childhood toys. When he was 10, he asked if he could have it made into a pendant, something he could wear always. They found a craftsman who could do it without damaging the carving, setting it in a protective silver frame that could be worn on a chain. Leo wore it every day, tucked under his shirt, close to his heart. His siblings each had their own talismans by then, small carved animals that had appeared in various ways, through estate sales, antique shops, even one found buried in their garden when they were planting a tree. The family grew and changed, as families do. They moved to a larger house when the third child was born. Ethan changed jobs. Lily went back to school to become a nurse, inspired by their experiences to be part of healing in a more direct way. Through all the changes, the sense of protection remained. Not a guarantee against all harm, they learned that when Lily's father became ill and eventually passed, but a presence that made even the difficult times bearable. During her father's last days, Lily swore she saw the dog once, sitting in the corner of the hospice room, its presence bringing peace to a painful passage. They started a tradition of family storytelling nights, where each person would share something mysterious or wonderful they'd experienced or heard about. The children's friends would beg to be included, drawn by the atmosphere of acceptance and wonder. These weren't ghost stories meant to frighten, but mystery stories meant to inspire, to open minds to the possibility that the world was far more magical than most people realized. The wooden dog, now Leo's pendant, would be passed around the circle, each person holding it while they told their story, as if it somehow made the telling easier, more true. When Leo was 15, he came home from school one day visibly shaken. A classmate had been in a serious car accident, was in intensive care, not expected to survive. Leo asked if he could visit, if he could bring his pendant. Ethan and Lily exchanged glances, then agreed. At the hospital, Leo sat by his classmate's bed, holding the pendant, humming the melody he'd known all his life. The monitors showed no change. The boy remained unconscious, but Leo stayed for an hour, just humming, just being present. 3 days later, against all medical expectations, the boy woke up. He recovered fully, and while the doctors credited excellent medical care, the boy told Leo privately that he'd heard the humming, felt something warm and protective pulling him back from a dark place. This was when Ethan and Lily realized that the gift, the protection, wasn't just for their family anymore. Through their children, it was spreading outward, touching other lives, creating ripples of healing that they could never have anticipated. They watched Leo carefully, worried sometimes that this responsibility might be too much for a teenager to bear. But Leo seemed to understand instinctively how to use his gift, when to act and when to simply be present, when to hum the healing melody, and when to let medical science do its work. The younger children showed their own versions of the gift. Their daughter, Avery, could calm crying babies with a touch. Their youngest son, Connor, seemed to know when people were in emotional pain and would appear with exactly the right words or gestures to help. It wasn't supernatural exactly, or maybe it was. The line between natural and supernatural seemed less important than the reality of healing happening, comfort being given, love being expressed in tangible ways. They were a family of healers, not in any formal sense, but in the ancient sense of people who could provide comfort when it was most needed. One evening, when Leo was 17 and preparing college applications, he asked his parents a serious question. "Do you think it will follow me when I leave? The protection? The ability to help?" They didn't have an answer, but Lily said, "I think it's part of you now. Not something external that might or might not be there, but something woven into who you are. The dog, the guardian, whatever we want to call it. I think its greatest gift wasn't just the comfort it provided that day, but the awakening of something that was always within our family, within you." Leo nodded, thoughtful. He decided to pursue veterinary medicine, surprising no one. But he also planned to minor in folklore and mythology, wanting to understand better the traditions of healing and protection that existed in cultures around the world. He'd already started researching, finding similar stories in dozens of different traditions. Guardian spirits, healing animals, protective presences that appeared in times of need. The universality of it suggested something fundamental about human experience, about the reality of love manifesting in mysterious ways. The night before Leo left for college, the whole family gathered for a special dinner. As they sat around the table, sharing memories and wishes for the future, there was a moment of perfect silence. In that silence, they all heard it, the humming. Not from any of them, but from somewhere else, everywhere and nowhere at once. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was unmistakable. The melody they all knew, the sound that had started everything, blessing their gathering, confirming that whatever had watched over them would continue to do so, no matter where life took them. Leo took the wooden dog pendant with him to college, of course, but before he left, he carved a small dog of his own. His first attempt at woodworking. It wasn't as refined as the ancient one, but it had its own charm. He gave it to his youngest brother Connor, passing on the tradition. "For when you need it," he said simply. Connor, only 8 but old for his years, nodded solemnly and tucked it into his pocket. The chain of protection, of love, of mystery would continue. Years passed. Leo became a veterinarian, specializing in animal-assisted therapy. He met Jessica Brooks, the daughter of the woman who had seen the dog at the hospital years before. They discovered their connection at a conference on alternative healing methods, and the synchronicity of it felt like another piece of the mystery clicking into place. They married, had children of their own. And yes, the dog appeared for them too when their first child needed surgery at 6 months old. Not visible to everyone, never photographable despite their attempts, but absolutely real in its presence and its comfort. Ethan and Lily, now grandparents, kept the family stories. They added new chapters to the leather-bound book, documenting not just the appearances of the guardian, but the ways the gift manifested in each family member. They hosted gatherings where extended family would come together, sharing their experiences, maintaining the oral tradition that seemed as important as the written one. The house where they'd raised their children became known as a place of healing, not through any advertisement but through whispered recommendations, people bringing their sick children just to sit in the garden where Leo had played, where something protective and benevolent seemed to linger. One day, going through old papers from Ethan's grandfather's estate that had been in storage, they found something extraordinary. A journal, hidden in the lining of an old suitcase. In it, Ethan's grandfather had documented every appearance of the dog he knew about, going back generations. The entries went back to the 1700s, the earliest written in fading ink in a language they had to have translated. But the story was consistent, a guardian that appeared to protect the innocent, especially children, especially in moments of medical crisis. The journal included sketches, remarkably similar to their photographs, and descriptions of the humming, the same melody across centuries. The final entry was dated just a week before Ethan's grandfather's death. It read, "The guardian has been with our family for longer than memory. It is not ours alone, but belongs to all who suffer and need comfort. My great-grandchild will understand this better than I do. The wooden tokens are anchors, keeping the connection strong across time. But the real magic is love itself, love so strong it takes form, becomes visible, audible, tangible. This is my legacy, our legacy, humanity's legacy. To love so fiercely that it transcends death, time, and understanding. The dog is just one form it takes. There are others, will be others. Watch for them, welcome them, be one of them when you can. Reading this, Ethan and Lily finally understood. They weren't special, chosen, or unique. They were simply part of an endless chain of love and protection that existed throughout human history. The dog was their family's particular manifestation, but every family, every person, had access to this same force if they were open to it. The real medicine that had worked that day at the clinic wasn't the dog itself, but what it represented. Love so powerful it could take physical form. Comfort so deep it could heal what seemed unhealable. They shared the journal with their children, now all adults with families of their own. Each had their own stories to add by then, their own encounters with mysterious comfort. The tradition continued, evolved, spread. Leo's veterinary practice became known for inexplicable healings. Avery became a pediatric nurse whose presence alone could calm the most distressed children. Connor became a teacher, the one students turned to when life seemed impossible. They didn't advertise their gifts, didn't claim special powers. They simply remained open to the mystery, ready to be channels for whatever healing wanted to flow through them. The wooden dog, the original one that had been Ethan's grandfather's, eventually passed to Leo's first child, a daughter named Lily after her grandmother. The moment the baby touched it, she smiled and hummed, the melody perfect despite being only days old. The cycle continued. The protection remained. The mystery deepened rather than resolved. And that was as it should be. Some things weren't meant to be understood but experienced, not meant to be proven but lived, not meant to be explained but passed on with wonder and gratitude. Looking back on it all, from that first terrifying vaccination day to becoming grandparents themselves, Ethan and Lily marveled at the journey. What had started as a moment of crisis had become a lifetime of discovery, a multi-generational story of love manifesting in impossible ways. They'd learned that medicine came in many forms, that healing happened on levels beyond the physical, that protection could arrive on 4 legs with a humming song that knew no earthly origin. They'd learned that family extended beyond blood, that connection transcended time, that love was quite literally the most powerful force in the universe. And the dog, it still appeared here and there when needed most, not just to their family now but to others who'd heard the stories, who believed, who were open to mystery. Sometimes in hospitals, sometimes in homes, sometimes in places of great sorrow that needed comfort. Always gentle, always humming that ancient melody, always disappearing once its work was done. Those who saw it rarely spoke of it publicly, understanding instinctively that some experiences were too sacred for casual conversation. But they knew each other when they met, recognized the look in each other's eyes, the knowledge that the world was far more magical than most people dared to believe. The medical establishment never acknowledged what happened in those examination rooms, those hospital wards, those moments of crisis where something unexplainable provided comfort. But individual doctors and nurses knew. They'd seen too much to deny it, even if they couldn't explain it. Some kept their own journals, documenting the impossible healings, the mysterious comforts, the appearances of things that shouldn't exist but did. A shadow network of believers in something beyond conventional medicine, not replacing it, but supplementing it with something older, deeper, more fundamental to human experience. As Ethan and Lily entered their 70s, they looked back on that day at the pediatric clinic with nothing but gratitude. Not just for the comfort the dog had provided Leo, but for the door it had opened to a lifetime of wonder. They'd raised their children to be open to mystery, to believe in love's power, to trust that help would come when truly needed. They'd seen that trust rewarded over and over again. Their family had become a beacon of sorts, a reminder that miracles still happened, that love still worked magic, that protection still arrived in forms both expected and unexpected. They often wondered about the origin of it all. Had some ancient ancestor made a pact? Was it simply the accumulation of love over generations becoming so concentrated it took physical form? Was the dog a spirit, an angel, a projection of collective family consciousness? They never found answers, and eventually they stopped needing them. The reality of the experience, the comfort provided, the healings witnessed, these were enough, more than enough. They were everything. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Ethan and Lily told the story one more time. The room was silent except for their voices, taking turns with different parts of the tale. The youngest children listened with wide eyes, the older ones with knowing smiles. When they finished, Leo's daughter, now 5 herself, held up the wooden dog and said, "He's here now. He says he's proud of all of us." And in that moment everyone felt it, the presence, the warmth, the protective love that had watched over them for generations and would continue to do so for generations to come. The story never really ended, of course. It continued with each new child born, each new crisis faced, each new moment of inexplicable comfort. The wooden dogs multiplied, carved by family members who felt called to create them, each one unique but all carrying the same essential energy. They were given as gifts to friends facing medical challenges, to families with sick children, to anyone who needed a tangible reminder that they weren't alone, that protection existed, that love could take forms beyond human understanding. Some recipients reported seeing the dog. Others just felt a presence. Still, others experienced nothing unusual, but found comfort in the gift itself, the story behind it, the reminder that people cared. It didn't matter whether they believed in the literal truth of the guardian dog. What mattered was the opening it created, the possibility it suggested, the hope it offered that help could come from unexpected places. The wooden dogs became seeds of wonder, planted in hearts that had perhaps forgotten magic existed. The family reunions grew larger as the story spread to distant relatives who'd heard whispers of the guardian. They came seeking their own connections to the mystery, and often they found them. Old photographs were discovered showing shadowy figures beside children. Stories were remembered of unexplained recoveries, mysterious comforts, strange animals that appeared and disappeared. The tapestry of protection was revealed to be vast, intricate, woven through many families, many cultures, many times. The dog was just one thread, but following it revealed the whole magnificent pattern. Medical professionals who'd witnessed the inexplicable healings began to study the phenomenon more seriously, though always privately, always carefully. They documented cases where children's conditions improved dramatically after reported encounters with the guardian dog or similar entities. They noted patterns. The appearances were always during genuine medical crises, always with children or the vulnerable, always accompanied by that distinctive humming sound that seemed to resonate at a frequency that promoted healing. Some theorized about quantum entanglement, morphic fields, the power of consciousness to affect matter. But the theories always fell short of the reality, which remained stubbornly, beautifully inexplicable. Leo's research into folklore and mythology revealed similar stories worldwide. Every culture had its version of guardian spirits that appeared in times of medical crisis. The forms varied: dogs, bears, birds, even mythical creatures, but the function was consistent: to provide comfort that transcended physical intervention, to remind humans that they were part of something larger, something that cared for them in ways beyond understanding. He published papers on the subject, careful to present them as cultural anthropology rather than claims of supernatural reality. But those who knew how to read between the lines understood what he was really documenting: evidence of love as a force of nature, as real and powerful as gravity or electromagnetism. The children who'd been touched by the guardian, Leo and his siblings, their children, and now their children's children, all showed unusual resilience in the face of life's challenges. Not immunity from difficulty, but an ability to find comfort in the darkest moments, to trust that help would come, to be that help for others when needed. They became doctors, nurses, teachers, social workers, artists, and musicians, all in their own ways continuing the work of healing, of providing comfort, of being guardians for others. The wooden dog that had started it all, Ethan's grandfather's carving, became more beautiful with age. The wood seemed to glow with an inner light, especially when held by children. It never showed signs of decay despite being handled constantly for generations. Museums offered astronomical sums for it. Researchers wanted to study its composition, but the family kept it close, understanding that its power lay not in the object itself, but in what it represented, what it connected them to. It was a key, a door, a bridge to something eternal and protective. As Ethan and Lily aged, they worried less about leaving their children and grandchildren, knowing the protection would continue. They'd seen enough to trust that death was not an ending, but a transformation, that the love they'd given and received would continue to manifest in whatever forms were needed. They imagined joining the guardian themselves someday, becoming part of the protective force that watched over future generations. The thought brought comfort rather than fear. On quiet evenings, sitting in their garden where so many mysterious encounters had occurred, they would sometimes hear the humming without any visible source. It had become the soundtrack of their lives, a reminder of the day everything changed, the day they discovered that the world was far more magical than they'd ever imagined. They would hold hands, these two people who'd raised a family surrounded by mystery and wonder, and feel grateful for every moment of the journey. The scientific community eventually had to acknowledge that something unusual was happening, though they struggled to define or explain it. Studies showed that children who possessed one of the carved dogs recovered from illnesses faster, experienced less anxiety during medical procedures, showed remarkable resilience in the face of trauma. The effect couldn't be attributed to placebo alone, as it worked even with infants too young to understand. Some researchers proposed that the carvings carried some form of beneficial energy. Others suggested they were focal points for collective positive intention, but no explanation fully captured what families like Ethan and Lily's knew through experience. Love could take form, protection could manifest physically, and miracles were simply love refusing to be bound by the laws of physics. The story spread beyond their family, beyond their community, becoming something of an urban legend, though one with unusual credibility due to the number of witnesses and the consistency of the accounts. Support groups formed for parents who'd experienced similar phenomena. They met quietly, sharing their stories, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone or crazy. The groups became their own form of healing circle, places where the impossible was acknowledged and celebrated rather than dismissed or explained away. Children's hospitals began to report an increase in unexplained positive outcomes, not dramatic enough to make headlines, but statistically significant enough to puzzle administrators. Some hospitals quietly began keeping wooden dog carvings in their chapels or meditation rooms, gifts from grateful families who'd experienced mysterious comforts. Staff members would sometimes find these carvings moved to different locations, always to rooms where children were struggling, though security cameras never showed anyone moving them. Leo's daughter, the one who'd held the original carving as a baby, grew up to become a researcher in consciousness studies. She approached the family mystery with both scientific rigor and open-hearted acceptance of mystery. Her work on the observer effect in quantum mechanics and its possible relationship to healing intentions gained respect in academic circles. She never mentioned the guardian dog in her published papers, but her colleagues knew there was something personal driving her research. Some experience that had convinced her consciousness could affect reality in ways science was only beginning to understand. The family tradition of storytelling evolved with technology. They created a private digital archive, encrypted and protected, where family members around the world could upload their experiences, photographs, videos. The collection grew to include hundreds of accounts, not just of the dog, but of other manifestations of protection and comfort. Patterns emerged. The appearances often coincided with significant dates in family history. The humming melody had subtle variations that seemed to convey different types of comfort. The wooden carvings would sometimes warm to the touch just before someone needed help. Despite all the documentation, all the shared experiences, the mystery never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each new piece of evidence. The guardian dog remained elusive, impossible to capture clearly on camera, impossible to track or predict, impossible to summon at will. It appeared when truly needed, provided what was necessary, then vanished. This elusiveness became part of its power. It couldn't be commodified, controlled, or exploited. It remained pure, a manifestation of love that existed outside the human tendency to possess and define. As the original witnesses aged and passed on, Ethan first, then Lily a year later, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate their lives and the legacy they'd left. The funeral was less a mourning than a celebration of mystery, of lives lived in wonder, of love that had taken impossible forms. During Lily's service, as her grandchildren sang the humming melody that had become a family anthem, everyone present swore they saw two large shadows at the back of the church, sitting side by side, watching over the proceedings with what could only be described as approval. The wooden dogs continued to multiply, carved by family members, gifted to those in need, becoming a quiet network of comfort around the world. Each carving was unique, but all carried something of the original's energy. Recipients reported not just comfort but connection, a sense of belonging to something larger, older, more permanent than individual life. The carvings became symbols not of a specific belief system, but of the universal human experience of needing and receiving comfort in forms beyond explanation. Medical anthropologists began studying what they called anomalous healing events, documenting cases where conventional medicine couldn't explain positive outcomes. The guardian dog cases became a subset of this research, notable for their consistency and the multi-generational nature of the experiences. Some researchers proposed that certain families might carry genetic markers that made them more sensitive to what they carefully termed non-local healing influences. But genetics couldn't explain how the phenomenon spread to unrelated families who received the wooden carvings or heard the stories. The children who grew up with the guardian's protection developed their own understanding of reality, one that included mystery as a fundamental component rather than something to be solved. They became adults who could hold paradox, who could function in a scientific world while maintaining openness to experiences that science couldn't yet explain. They raised their own children with this same openness, teaching them that the world was both knowable and unknowable, that both science and mystery were true, that protection came in many forms. The pediatric clinic where it all began eventually closed, the building demolished to make way for a modern medical complex. But people still reported seeing a large, bear-like dog in the area, especially at dawn and dusk. Local children began leaving toys and treats at the spot where the old building had stood, creating an informal shrine to the guardian. Adults passing by would sometimes pause, remembering their own moments of inexplicable comfort, wondering if they too had been visited by something beyond ordinary understanding. The family's leather-bound book of stories grew to multiple volumes, each generation adding their experiences, their insights, their questions. Reading through them revealed not answers, but an ever-deepening mystery, a fractal pattern of love and protection that became more complex and beautiful the closer you looked. The books became treasured heirlooms, passed down with the wooden carvings, maintaining the oral and written tradition of wonder. Some family members tried to investigate the historical origins more thoroughly, tracing genealogies, researching local legends, consulting with indigenous elders about guardian spirits. They found threads and hints, but never a definitive beginning. It seemed the protection had always existed, waiting to be recognized, waiting for hearts open enough to perceive it. Perhaps every family had such guardians, but not all maintained the awareness across generations. Perhaps the real gift wasn't the dog itself, but the capacity to see it, to accept it, to pass on the story of its existence. The humming melody was eventually transcribed into musical notation, though no one could agree on exactly what key it was in or why it seemed to shift depending on who was humming it. Musicians in the family would play variations at gatherings, and always there would be a moment when everyone felt the presence, the protection, the love that had started with a scared baby getting vaccinations, and had grown into a multi-generational testament to the power of mysterious comfort. As Leo entered his own old age, still practicing veterinary medicine, still witnessing inexplicable healings, he reflected on the journey that had begun with his infant tears and a mysterious comforter. He'd spent a lifetime trying to understand what had happened that day, and the only conclusion he'd reached was that understanding wasn't the point. The point was the comfort itself, the love it represented, the connection it created across time and space. The guardian dog had been a teacher, showing them that reality was far more fluid and responsive to love than anyone had imagined. His children and grandchildren carried on the tradition, each in their own way. Some became healers in traditional senses, doctors, therapists, nurses. Others became artists, using their creativity to provide different kinds of comfort. All of them maintained the family practice of watching for mystery, of being open to the impossible, of trusting that protection would come when needed. They learned to be guardians themselves, appearing in others' lives at crucial moments with exactly what was needed, then stepping back, allowing the mystery to remain mysterious. The wooden dog carvings began appearing in unexpected places, left anonymously at hospitals, orphanages, hospices. No one knew who was leaving them, but staff members learned to recognize their significance. Where the carvings appeared, comfort followed. Not always dramatically, not always visibly, but consistently enough that some institutions began to treat them as unofficial therapeutic tools. Insurance companies couldn't bill for their presence. Medical journals wouldn't publish studies about them. But the people who worked with suffering every day knew their value.